Sioux City, Iowa would seem a less than ideal location to launch an animation career, but that is what director, animator, and writer Ron Clements did in the early 1970s. Mr. Clements was a teenager working for a Sioux City television station as a resident artist. He had written, directed, and voiced an animated short that had been broadcast by the station and was looking to move to the wider animation world of L.A. or New York. A TV news exec from Los Angeles happened to view Ron's work and put him in touch with Hanna-Barbera. The studio, after looking at Mr. Clements' portfolio, offered him a job as an in-betweener, and Ron flew to L.A. and went to work in an industry new to him. From the get-go, he knew that he wanted to work at Disney Feature Animation, but had no clue about how to break in. After initial rejection, Ron came across an article about Disney's talent development program and was hired as a trainee. Each test he made inside the program was stronger than the one before, and within months, Clements was working under the tutelage of veteran animator Frank Thomas. His rise was swift. A journey animator on The Rescuers and Pete's Dragon, Ron became a supervising animator on The Fox and the Hound. Moving to story work on The Black Cauldron, Mr. Clements stepped into the director's chair on The Great Mouse Detective, and he's combined his passion for story with his love of directing in a long string of feature films that include The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Hercules, and The Princess and the Frog. We talked at the Animation Guild. Here we are on the last Friday in April 2012 talking to Ron Clements, who has directed more hit animated features than just about anybody extant except his partner, John Musker. So my question to you is sort of where we started at lunch. What grabbed you to get into animation back in Sioux City, Iowa when you were a tot?
I mean, I actually think that I started drawing, I think, when I was probably about 2 years old. And got a little blackboard, and I drew a lot as a kid. I don't draw that much anymore, but I drew a lot when I was a kid. And I remember some of the first cartoon characters that I drew were Woody Woodpecker and Mighty Mouse. I was really into drawing Woody Woodpecker and Mighty Mouse, and I really liked the Woody Woodpecker show. And my favorite thing about the Woody Woodpecker show was they had little sort of interstitials in the middle of it's a half-hour TV program shown in the afternoon, at least where I was in Sioux City, Iowa. And in the middle of the show, Walter Lantz would kind of do a little behind-the-scenes thing and show how animation was done. And you'd see animators at their desks with the pegs doing the drawings and see cells and see them being photographed and see how it works, and that just fascinated me. I thought that was really, really cool. So
you weren't even in elementary school at that point, right?
No, that was preschool. I was like 3 or 4, I think, during that period. And I just was really fascinated by the behind the scenes stuff. And once in a while on the Disney program, which this was before the World of Color, but it was like Walt Disney Presents or whatever. They would also have some things on that would go behind the scenes.
Oh yeah,
and show how some of the features were done, and I thought that was really interesting. And but the big thing for me, I would say, was when I was 9 years old, and I saw Pinocchio for the first time. It was a reissue, but for me it was new, and I was just blown away. I somehow was at the right age. I'd seen animated features.
Was that the first feature that you'd seen?
No, I saw. I think saw Cinderella when I was about 2 years old.
But that didn't
I actually
have the same
a
impact?
vague memory, just a vague memory of seeing that. I remember a little of the Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo and a couple of things. But no, it didn't have. I think I slept through a lot of it when I was 2. But I did see. I had seen Sleeping Beauty, and that had a big impact on me. I saw Sleeping Beauty when I was somewhat older. That was the first release. But somehow Pinocchio, I was just at the right age, I think, 9 years old, and it was after seeing Pinocchio that I really started to seriously think, I think I would like to work in animation somehow. That really seemed like a really interesting sort of profession. And then I went to the library. I went to the library a lot, and there wasn't a lot on animation. I think there was one book I found in the library on animation, a kind of old book that had some of the basic stuff, and I think I saw around the time I saw Pinocchio. But then somewhere around, I saw in the Sioux City Public Library the Bob Thomas book, the Art of Animation,
right?
Which was that book's been reissued a few times, but the original book was
Is that the one that came
pretty
out
much
for Sleeping Beauty?
Yeah, it was about the making of Sleeping Beauty primarily, but it went into the history of Disney, and that book was like the coolest book I had ever seen in the library, and I wanted to own that book. I couldn't own the book, and I didn't have any idea how you could buy that book.
Because it wasn't out in a bookstore.
Just in the library. So I just kept checking it out. I was like the only one, but I checked it out over and over again.
They never prevented you from doing this? So you can't come back and take this again?
No, they didn't. And I must have checked that book out just many, many times, and was really inspired by that book. So that was kind of where I first got into it. I was also interested in comic books. I was a big comic book fan, and I thought maybe that I might want to work in comics as well. And so in my mind, it was like I was thinking, animation or comics, and
so the drawing bug had hit you as well, and you in middle school and junior high and high school.
And I like to write. I like to write as well, and I would write scripts and stories and sometimes short stories and comic books. I made my own comic books when I was a kid, but just
that's almost a rite of passage. A lot of artists.
Yeah, and I had my own superheroes, Eagle Man, and various things that I sort of drew up versions of the Planeteers. I drew up these comic books. Didn't really.
Do you still have them?
I have one comic that I did. That's a digression, but all the early artwork that I did, and after I saw Pinocchio, I did just tons of drawings of Pinocchio and the characters in Pinocchio and all this stuff. My mother put all of my childhood artwork and my comic books and everything I did. She put them in a box that was. We lived in an apartment building, and she put it in the basement for storage, and somehow it got thrown out.
Uh-oh. So you don't have any of those artifacts?
I have a few things, but most of it I don't have.
When you go back and look at them now, what's your reaction? This kid had promise?
Well, I mean, for my age, I think I did get a lot of encouragement. I think, which was a good thing for me. I got a lot of encouragement from school teachers and things like that. I would say more for my drawing than for my writing, but I did like to write as well. I wrote a novel when I was 11.
Wow.
And I sent it to publishers.
And they said?
It was rejected. But I did get some, and I think it was pretty obvious it was not written by an adult. And I got some nice rejection letters that said, keep going, and you should do this. But it was, but I'd say for the drawing, I got probably the most encouragement. I always had ideas for animated films, and I kind of designed characters for animated films, and I would write scripts for animated films, but I didn't have any way of making animated films. I just imagined, like, if I could make an animated film.
And this is what it would be.
And until I think when I was in 8th grade, I had a paper route. When I was in 8th grade, and I saved up my money for my paper route, and I bought a movie camera, a Yashica movie camera.
Single frame.
It had single frame. It was one of the only ones that had that.
Put it up and it goes single, and put it down and it would be.
There was a little cable that you attached to it. You pushed it and it would shoot single frame. So when I got that, then I made some little animated films, some little Super 8 animated films.
And what was the subject matter?
Oh, various. The first one I did, I think, was called Experiment in Animation, and it wrote itself out. I did that experiment in animation. It all wrote itself out on screen.
A frame at a time.
Yeah, I just did a frame at a time, and it was just a guy walking down an alley, a little sort of forlorn guy, kind of walking down an alley. It was just a walk cycle. And I didn't know, I had no sense of timing, so I think maybe I thought, animation, it requires, I was overwhelmed by the amount of drawing, so this was like a 30 frame walk cycle. And so the character's walking in slow motion. He was very, very slow, and then I realized, oh, so even though it takes a lot of drawings to animate, it doesn't take that many to animate.
You over-animated. Too many drawings for the action.
But I learned a little from that, and I did a couple more. I had sort of an ambitious science fiction thing that I had all storyboarded out and planned out, and I did one section of that. That was I filmed the beginning of that animated film, the science fiction thing, over a weekend, and I was using like Kodak Super 8. They were little cartridges they put in the camera. And it took me I spent an entire weekend just filming that frame by frame. And it turned out that the film had jammed in the cartridge, so when I got it back, it was processed. It was all black, nothing exposed.
So there was a wasted weekend.
Totally wasted weekend. I actually went back and reshot that whole thing.
And this time it worked?
This time it worked. But I never finished that film. Part of the problem was, even though I had a Super 8 camera, I didn't have any way to do sound. And this one really required sound, so somehow... And I think I had a lot of projects that I started and didn't finish. It seemed like there were a lot of things that petered out. Only a few things got finished. I was proud of the things I got finished.
Well, have you and John traded war stories about his Super 8 productions?
I've seen his Super 8 feature, live action feature. Yes, and I would have liked to have done a live action feature, but I had no friends. I had a few friends, but not. I was kind of a loner.
But nobody
as a kid.
That you could.
I was a loner as a kid, and I that's part of the appeal to me about an animated film was it was the one way you could make a movie all by yourself.
Oh yeah,
So that was part of it. So that was kind of.
And then you took classes in high school, art classes.
I took art classes in high school, all through high school. Like I say, I always got a lot of encouragement. I did a lot of art. I was the cartoonist for the school newspaper, and I did a lot of artwork for the yearbook and a lot of artwork for school projects. We talked a little about
your job, but during that whole period, you had an actual paying gig. Talk about your Sioux City television station paying gig and how you got that, because that's fascinating.
Yeah, we talked about it at lunch, but when I was 15 years old, I actually got a part-time job at a television station in Sioux City, Iowa, as a graphic artist. And the way I got that job was it all had to do with watching an old television program, a sort of afternoon talk show called The Mike Douglas Show that aired regularly. And if I hadn't been watching The Mike Douglas Show on one particular afternoon of the summer when I was 15, my life could have been completely different, because watching that show changed my life, and it possibly made it go into a direction it might not have gone otherwise. Because on this particular summer afternoon when I was watching the show, an actor who was popular at the time, no one probably would know who he is now, but Howard Duff.
Howard Duff, he had a long career.
Yeah, he did, and he in movies and television, but he actually, in his spare time, he liked to do caricatures, drawing caricatures. And he was on the Mike Douglas Show, and he showed a whole series of caricatures he had done of celebrities. And they were good. At least I at the time, I remember.
Remembering back, they seemed good.
Yeah, and I thought that's really cool. And I hadn't really tried that, so I thought I want to try to do some caricatures. So I just started looking for pictures of famous people to do caricatures of, and actors and other people. And then in TV Guide, there was a local ad in TV Guide that had our local at a TV station in Iowa. There was the sportscaster. Gene Sherman, the sportscaster, and Charles Harness, the newscaster. They were very popular in Sioux City. They were well known. So I actually did a caricature of both of them, separate caricatures, one of the newsman, one of the sportsman. And I actually sent them to each other, because I knew they had a little segment on the air where they would sort of harass each other at the end of the news, because this was the happy news days. So I sent them in, and that night they showed them. They showed them on the air.
Were you shocked that they showed them?
I was, but at the same time, maybe I thought maybe I was kind of hoping they would show them, and they did, and that was fun. I thought that was cool, and a few people called me up who had seen it.
Now, I have a question that's occurred to me. How many passes of the characters was it the first caricature of each out of the box, or did you say, no, I don't quite have what I want, I'm going to do another one?
I think at that time I think I had already learned at that point, I was 15, that you can improve your drawing a lot by redrawing and going over it, and so I think they were inked.
Well, so you probably had some roughs, and then
so yeah, I roughed, and then I went over those and refined them, and because that's what I did for the cartoon. In my freshman year, I was cartoonist for the school newspaper.
Oh yeah.
So I inked. I had to ink those because they had to be inked to.
So you knew inking, you knew roughing.
Yeah, so I
had
a little bit of technique. So they, I mean, my influences were a lot, aside from Howard Duff, were Mort Drucker and Jack Davis in Mad Magazine. I mean, those were the kings, those were the guys. And so I tried to draw in their style as much as I possibly could. So they showed them on the air. I thought that was cool. I thought that was it. But it just so happened that right at that moment, they had a guy in the art department there, a graphic artist, who was leaving, and they were looking for somebody to fill his spot.
And they thought of you.
And then there were my drawings sent in, so they called me up and they said, there's a position open here. We're looking for a television artist. Could you come down and meet with us? And I had a portfolio of the comic books, various things I had drawn and the cartoons, and I brought that down. And they liked it. They didn't know I was 15, and they were sort of surprised I was 15. And it's like they thought, well, that could be a problem because there were
child labor laws.
But they found a way. Somehow I was able to get a work permit. So I started working there, so from that point on, all through high school.
So were you there Monday through Friday, every day?
Yeah, every day.
3 or 4 hours a day?
Yeah, and we did all kinds of things. A lot of it was ads and things. Most of it was on-air artwork. Some of it was for publications and things like that. But did billboard illustration, did courtroom illustration.
Really? Did they send you to the courtroom to draw the defendants?
Yeah, I did that, and
that did on a news show, right?
Yeah, and did all kinds of things. I started doing these little chroma key things during the news, where like we talk about a fire, we need to have a little drawing of a building on fire. We talk about something else. So it was like that was the high pressure thing. That was like working for a newspaper. Like the news is going to go on at like 5:30 or 6:30 or whatever, and you've got like maybe 1 hour to do the day's sort of chroma keys. I mean, you don't know what they're going to do till they come right in, and then you do them, and then they're on the air. So it was
you just did them, and then they used them how they wanted to, right?
So it was kind of a fun job, and I got to do a lot of different stuff. And I had also been doing these Super 8 movies on my own. So when I thought, I thought maybe we could do some commercials. So I brought my Super 8 films in, and I showed them to people at the television station, and
you were pretty ambitious.
I guess so. I mean, so they saw those, and they actually, I think there was a feeling like, well, to do animation, you've got to have, it's very, very expensive, and you've got to have professional equipment and everything. But the Super 8 films I just did with, cutting rolls of acetate into cells and painting them, in the way it was done, and just.
So you did them. Did you do stuff for air on the Super 8, or did they say? Well,
no, it was. We went to 16 because that's what we did for the television. So they actually built a kind of animation stand for me, and we did some little commercials. I did a few like 30-second or 1-minute commercials, local animation.
Wow!
I have to read the tracks myself and do it, but they turned out okay, and that sort of led to. I'd have all these films that I was sort of planning to do. So I had this film about Sherlock Holmes that I'd kind of designed a little bit and had written a script for.
Predating The Great Mouse Detective by a few years.
Predating Great Mouse Detective and predating Robert Downey by a great amount. But I was a big Sherlock Holmes fan, and that was part of that. Like, I really loved Sherlock Holmes, and I'd read all of Conan Doyle, and I just loved that Victorian atmosphere. So I asked the TV station if I could make my own film in my spare time.
Right.
So I did. It took me, I think, about 6 months to make the film. It was 15 minutes. It was in color. I did all the voices. Once again, it was sort of a thing where I kind of did the thing. It's pretty crude. It's very crude, but it was a lot of fun to do.
Did it make it to air?
It did locally. It's kind of embarrassing now, but that film actually helped me
Got the ball rolling professionally
in a lot of ways, so yeah, it was. I really didn't know what I was doing on that. It's like the funny thing was with the soundtrack. I had no way to mix sound. I didn't really know how to mix sound. So when I recorded the sound, I did the voices, and I recorded specific sound effects on a tape recorder, so that I could just hit the tape recorder. And then I had music cues because they had these public domain records at the TV station that kind of had
needle
scoring.
drops, right?
So it was like an old radio play that I did it all live. It's like I'm doing the voices. I'm hitting the sound effects. I'm playing the music.
Image, right?
No. This is all. I did the track first.
You did the track first,
and then I synced the picture to image. So I had to read the tracks with the music and the sound effects. It's all. But I read the tracks. The pride, though, is the budget of that film. I think it may be the most impressive. It was a 15-minute full color animated film
with sound.
With sound, cost me $12.
How did you do it for $12? Well, the film would be more expensive.
Well, they gave me the film. The TV station actually, they let me use their film and their equipment. There really wasn't anything that I actually had to pay for. I mean, I think my labor, like I say, there were 6 months of work.
If you count the labor, it's probably more than $12.
I think the only thing I really had to pay for, because I had titles that I wanted to sort of zoom into the camera, and to do that I had to have lithos printed so that they would be accurate and printed really small, so I could zoom in on them and they would be big. And that's what cost me the $12 was to do the lithos for the titles, and that was it. But the way then that was after I graduated from high school, I really by that point really wanted to get into animation. I sort of
and you figured really you're not going to stay in Sioux City.
Well, there wasn't a big market in Sioux City, even with our little commercials. But I didn't know. I had no idea how to go about it, or just how you got into animation. I really wanted to work at Disney. That was my goal, but Iowa was quite a bit right. But and so I was kind of floundering. Originally I was going to go to college in Davenport, Iowa, and then I decided not to do that. Then I went to New York. I flew to New York when I was 17, and I was thinking of going to school at the School of Visual Arts because they did have an animation program there. But I got just panicked about living in New York.
What am I going to do?
So I didn't do that. So I was still working at the TV station, but I wasn't sure kind of what I was going to do. And then there was like an executive from the San Fernando Valley, a news guy, I think, a news executive who was visiting our TV station, and they sort of, hey, let's show you this film. This young kid here, and he saw the film and he liked it. And it happened that he knew people at Hanna-Barbera. He said, I know some people at Hanna-Barbera. And the TV station was really trying to help me out, so they actually paid my way to Los Angeles.
And that's what, 1972?
This was in 73, I think.
73.
73. I paid my way out to Los Angeles, and I met, I think I met Iwo Takamoto, Bob Singer at Hanna-Barbera. I showed my film, and I had a portfolio, and they hired me. They said, yeah, well, they would give me a job as an in-betweener. And so that was like,
so
that
you
was
were
something that was tangible.
You were there for 6 months, right?
Less than that, I think, probably about 4 months. I started in September of 1973 as an in-betweener at Hanna-Barbera, moved to Los Angeles, got a little apartment, and called Disney. Even when I first visited, I called Disney, but I just called the personnel department.
Right, that's always a mistake.
And they just said, well, no, we're not hiring people. They had just finished the feature Robin Hood, and they just laid off people, so they said there were no openings. And
right.
So after about 4 months at Hanna-Barbera, I knew that was seasonal work when I came out. They told me that it
Right.
wasn't year-round work.
Were you saving
When
up
the
enough
season
money to
ended,
live
I was
through-
saving everything I could, and it wasn't a lot of money, but I saved everything because I knew there was going to be a drought, and I was hoping to make it through the period of unemployment for the next TV season to start up. But during that time, I stumbled on a magazine, a film magazine, on a newsstand in Hollywood that had an article by John Canemaker about Disney and about the talent development program at Disney.
Right.
And I found out in this article that Disney had a talent development program, and they were actually looking for people. They were recruiting people to be in that because the story at Disney was basically that for a long time the doors were closed at Disney for years and years.
Oh, yeah.
You couldn't get into Disney. And the guys who were there had been there forever. I mean, the guys who made Snow White were some of the same guys.
They were getting
who were
old.
And then they were, and I think for a while they were getting into close to their 60s and approaching retirement. And Walt Disney had died in I always forget,
66, the end of 66.
And I think they were sort of thinking, possibly from what I heard, the studio was thinking they might just phase out animation after Walt died. They weren't sure, but the first animated film to come out after Walt died was The Jungle Book, and it was a huge success. So I think The Jungle Book really was where they started to think, maybe we should try to keep this going.
Yeah,
They felt that to keep it going, they needed to sort of hire new people and train them.
Right.
And it was actually it was very lucky for me in just all kinds of ways. The timing was just right because they actually were looking for people about my age. They were looking for people without a lot of experience because they felt that because the way Disney approached animation was certainly different than the way Hanna-Barbera approached animation.
Right.
And they felt like if they got people who were already working outside of Disney, they would have to untrain them in a lot of ways because they had learned a sort of different techniques. But if they got people like me, sort of, you could sort of
But
mold them.
they didn't recoil from your season of work at Hanna-Barbera saying
No,
you've
the
been
4
tainted?
months. The 4 months didn't. I wasn't too tainted, and I had taken some classes at Art Center while I had come out. And Art Center, they had gotten some people from Art Center. So even though I hadn't, it was just like evening class at Art Center. So I called the head of the program at that time. The funny thing is, his name was Don Duckwall.
Don Duckwall.
Donald Duckwall was actually the head of the executive in
A
charge
great
of
name
the
to
training
be in
program.
charge of
Yeah.
the...
So I just called him up and I told him I had this film that I'd done and I had a portfolio. I had life drawing, which was good because I had taken life drawing at Art Center and other stuff. I had caricatures and things. So he said, "Come in, bring your work in." And so I came, and I didn't have a car. I took the bus to Disney but just seeing the lot, the studio. That was just really one of the.
And that was your first day on the lot, right?
Yeah, and I came in and I met Don Duckwall, and I met Ed Hansen, who was the manager of animation, and I met Eric Larson that same day.
One of the nine old men.
One of the great nine old men, and who I definitely knew who he was because he was like talked about in that book by Bob Thomas, and
There's pictures of him.
There's pictures of him. I had read that book 100 times, so I definitely knew who Eric Larson was, so they looked at my work and my film, and then I think I got a call. They said that we'd like you to start in the training program, which didn't mean that you were hired at Disney. It was a little bit like the way things worked at this point, and this was before Cal Arts. Cal Arts, the character animation program at Cal Arts was going to start up in about a year and a half after that, I think.
Right, so you got in way under that.
But I got in before that. There were other trainees there before me, certainly. I think Don Bluth and Dale Baer were the first ones in this program. And right at this point, guys like John Pomeroy and Andy Gaskell, Dick Sebast were all working on Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2, which was a Pooh featurette that was in production.
But you were on the front of that wave.
So I came in, and I was really excited. But honest to God, it was the first time I ever really met people like myself who were interested in animation, and there were some very talented people in that program: Dick Sebast, Andy Gaskell, John Pomeroy.
And they all went on to long
They were
careers.
really, and so I went from this high, this big high, like I've been accepted into the training program, which meant I had 4 weeks to do a personal test. It was like a screen test. Working with Eric, you worked with Eric for 4 weeks. You could animate anything you wanted within that 4 weeks. And at the end of the 4 weeks, the review board of the veteran animators would look at your work, and they would decide if you were going to stay or if you were going to go.
Thank you for being with us.
Yeah.
So what was you told me about your later test. What was your very first test?
Well, the first test was questionable. And it wasn't my idea exactly, and it's one of those things, because I was very, very shy. I was extremely shy. And I'm still shy, but I'm not as shy as I was then. I was almost pathologically shy. But I know Eric Larson just had to say, you did this test, this film with Sherlock Holmes. Maybe you should use Sherlock Holmes. So I didn't quit. At first I was thinking, well, maybe I'll do a Mickey Mouse test. Well, okay, Sherlock Holmes, I must do Sherlock Holmes. But my test, the film that I did was not Disney animation.
No.
And with anything, it resembled slightly Hanna-Barbera, but it wasn't Hanna-Barbera. So Sherlock Holmes, I mean, it's a human character. It's a tough thing. I didn't really have a design, and I spent like 3 weeks there just trying to do a walk cycle of Sherlock Holmes, and it was not going well. And I was so intimidated, I just kind of froze. I mean, I was just in panic mode, and it was like one of these things that this is like a dream come true, but it's all going to go bad. I know it's going to go bad. I'm not going to make it. I'm choking. I'm choking. I'm not going to make it. And these guys are really, really good. I mean, and they're so talented. And I almost did the last week. I spent 3 weeks of the 4 weeks doing this walk cycle, which wasn't very good. And the last week, then I added a Watson character based a little bit on the design, a milk call design of King Hubert in Sleeping Beauty.
Oh, okay.
And I actually had a little bit. I did a few things that were kind of fun with that. So after the 4 weeks, I think the feedback that I got was it was close. It definitely was not sort of a unanimous decision, but because of there were a few things in the Watson character that they liked, they were going to let me go another 4 weeks. And if you made it through the 8 weeks, you would be hired. So for the second 4 weeks, I used the character Rabbit from Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah.
And I did a rabbit test, and I felt more comfortable. I settled some of my panic and fear sort of subsided, and they liked that test. They were happy with that test. They thought it was a good test. So.
And then you blew them away with your third test.
Well, that third test. So I was just happy to make it through the 8 weeks, and it was like kind of a sigh of relief. And that meant that if you made it through the 8 weeks, now you were on permanent salary. You were hired, and you were put on production. So I was working on Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2, doing in-betweening, and Bob McRae was kind of in charge of taking in new people and showing them how to in-between, and I did that, and I was happy. But in my spare time, I did another test, which you were encouraged to do.
Now, would you do that nights, weekends, both?
Both. I did it nights
and
weekends.
They'd let you come into the studio and
No, I did it at home. They mostly, I think I worked on it at work some, but mostly I did it at home. They had these kind of portable animation
pegboard
disc, that thing that you could take home, so that you could work at home. I mean, the pegs didn't slide or anything, but you could do kind of basic stuff. So I did at least most of it, I think, at home. It was a Cruella de Vil test.
Yeah.
And it was a very ambitious test, at least I think. And I was excited about it, and really got into it. And Eric helped me a lot with the test, and the test turned out, they really liked that test a lot.
And it's probably still there in Disney archives somewhere.
It's somewhere, but I've looked at it for years and haven't been able to find it. And
really?
It's the same that's true. Don't get me started. But it's like all the tests at that time. I mean, John Pomeroy and Dick Sebast had done a test together, a famous test of that was from Robin Hood, Sir Hiss and Prince John. And the other tests, Andy's tests, all of these tests were all on a reel in Eric's office, just one reel of film. And when new trainees would come in, they'd show them the tests, and my tests were added to that, and it was all
Wow.
of those tests, and somehow that reel was never actually put on, transferred like to video or whatever, and it has,
It's gone.
it's gone as far as I know.
Well, that's a
Which is
shame.
very, yeah, and because I'd like to have that test, and it was all just, I mean, when you animated, you'd send it out to be shot. This was before we had like video shooting. You'd send it out to camera. It would come back a day or 2 days later, and then and that's how it was when you animated on production as well.
Same way.
But that test sort of changed things at Disney. Then they really liked that test a lot. Frank and Ollie were really they really liked the test, and Frank asked me to work with him then. He was working on the Rescuers, and to work with him, that he would be my mentor, and then I would sort of work under him.
So you animated on the Rescuers, right?
I did. Yeah, I
remember
wasn't an
what-
animator when I started. That's how it worked.
But you got
sort of had to
animation into
become an
the
animator.
picture.
I became an animator about halfway through Rescuers. I think I ended up with about maybe 250 feet or something like that.
What characters did you mainly animate?
Well, I animated Bernard and Bianca, but the characters that I animated the most were Evinrude, some of Evinrude, and the Swamp Volunteers, which are a small part of the movie, but Ellie Mae and Luke, and there was an owl and a rabbit, and those were kind of my characters. That's the Swamp Volunteers, and working with Frank but mainly the greatest thing about that was just I think I worked for about 2.5 years under Frank Thomas, and that was and Ollie Johnston was right next door, and Milt Call was just right down the hall, and every morning, or at least seems like most mornings, I would go into Frank's room and we'd go over stuff, and Milt would come in, or Ollie would come in, and they'd just be kind of shooting the breeze and talking about stuff, and like I said, I knew who they all were because of Bob Thomas's book. Although I would say, this is kind of a funny story, that the little time I worked at Hanna-Barbera, I would say Hanna-Barbera, there was a little bit of the sort of Hollywood thing going on at Hanna-Barbera. That is, guys sort of dressed like in kind of leather jackets, and there were gold chains, and this was like in the early 70s, but a little bit flashy. Disney was not that way at all. I mean, if you know Frank or know Ollie or anything, it's the most low-key, sort of unpretentious guys you could imagine. And first time I met Ollie Johnston, this was earlier when I started the studio, I was talking for him for a while in a little sort of corner of the hall where there was a vending machine, like a Coke machine, that was partially open, with the keys there partially open. And I thought Ollie was the guy who put the Cokes in the vending machine, until like sort of a little somewhere in the conversation, and I suddenly realized, no, wait, this is Ollie Johnston. But yeah, it was, but they were very certainly serious about animation. I mean, and Frank. I mean, he was a brilliant guy, really smart, really talented, great actor, and
the
that
Olivier
was
of animators.
Yeah, I think Chuck Jones called him Laurence Olivier, and just to sort of have that opportunity to kind of just talk to him,
distill
listen to
down
him.
what were the main points that he tried to impress on you?
I mean, it's hard to distill. I mean, a lot of it had to do with thought processes and in terms of getting into the character's head and what they're thinking. And just that aspect of some people who don't understand animation, when they say animators are actors, they think, what does that mean? Especially when, no, animators draw. They don't act, they draw. But it's really clear, if you're there very long, that the drawing is important when it's in drawn animation, and it has to be able to do it fast, and it has to be kind of second nature. But that's not really the primary thing of what that art form. It's a performance art form, and the performance is really the key, and that the moving characters is not the emphasis. It's making characters seem like they have a distinct personality, a unique personality, that they're alive.
Right.
And that's really the art, and that was the total emphasis with Frank. And relationships and how characters relate with each other and contrast with each other, and how you can show personality through that, and entertainment. I think just trying to find entertainment in sort of everything that you do, and trying to find really interesting ways. One big thing that I took from Frank that I think applies to not just animation, but just sort of everything is very much a Disney approach to things, is exploration. Frank was always like, so you're going to do a scene, don't just think of a way to do the scene and then do the scene. Think of 5 different ways to do the scene. Force yourself, even if you think you've got a great idea, and it's like you can't imagine there'd be a better way to do it. Force yourself to explore other ways to do it, like 5 different versions of how you do the scene. Then pick the one that's the best. And by doing that, you've really dug into it more.
Explored all the possibilities.
Yeah, explore the possibilities before you choose your possibility. And that's just I think a really important thing in the Disney approach is that exploration part of it. That a lot of times when you want to jump into I want to just start moving the character around, or even if you're working in story, I want to dive into continuity and just do the continuity, but explore first. Really explore. Really put a lot of thought and try to find the best way you can to do it, the most entertaining way to do something. I know part of the Disney approach that was emphasized so much is to try to find entertainment in everything, because it's really an illusion. Animation is such an illusion, and that particularly in feature animation, which is a special kind of animation, I think, with feature animation, where you're trying to sustain an audience's interest for an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and to do that, there's a lot of trickery and smoke and mirrors and illusion involved, because it's all fake, and yet you have to want to make the audience to believe it's all real, it's completely real,
Yeah,
and that they get completely lost into it, so it becomes absolutely real, and that's not easy to do, and whereas in a live action film, if you've got a charismatic actor, they can maybe, or actress, they can carry even moments in a movie that are maybe wouldn't be that interesting. But in animation, it's like if you lose the magic, even for a short bit, you can sort of lose the audience, and then any time you lose the audience, they may not come back. So it's this trying to sustain this thing and keep it going, sustain this illusion of life and reality, even though almost all the stories are fantasies of some kind. But and that's the magic of it. I think it's always been that way, that except for very young kids, a bad animated film can be torture to sit through. I mean, much more so than a bad live action film. A bad animated film, even though it may not be that long, it can seem forever. But a good animated film, or a great animated film, can just be a magical, transcendent kind of experience that can actually exceed a live action film, because there's some part of you that is sucked into something that another part of you knows is completely fabricated, but when you really believe it and you sort of fall into that spell, that's really cool. I mean, that's what attracted me to Disney, even when I was a kid, was I like features. I've always really been into features. I was interested in features more than shorts myself, just because of how magical they are when they work.
And so what was the reaction? Well, we should move along here. But at the end I remember seeing The Rescuers, because I got there just as they were wrapping it. And it was interesting. They made me go and sit through Robin Hood and Rescuers sort of back to back. And I remember going to Robin Hood and just finding it nice animation, but story-wise, not so much. But then I remember sitting in the theater up on the 3rd floor looking at The Rescuers and going, wow, this is really good. They had tension, they had humor, the pacing was good, and I'm thinking,
these are the same guys making these things back to back. How come one is so good and the other one is not awful, but it's not particularly compelling? Robin Hood.
I mean, it's all subjective. I know I saw Robin Hood there again at a point where I knew that I was starting in the animation program, but I hadn't started yet.
Right.
So it was like, I'm going to be working at Disney, or I'm going to start at least hopefully work at Disney. And I watched Robin Hood, and it has beautiful animation. It has beautiful animation in it, and Ollie Johnston, some of his best animation, I think. But the story is weak. I mean, you can be subjective about this. I think it's one of the weaker films story-wise.
I think it's one of the weaker films story-wise. And I once asked Ollie, I think when he was upstairs writing his book and he was nearby, I said, what is your favorite film that you worked on? And he goes, Robin Hood. And I'm going, ugh.
Well, that's the tricky thing, and it was touchy because I think both Frank and Ollie were pretty happy with Robin Hood. So you didn't want to, but my feeling that was it just felt episodic. It felt almost like you could take the end of the movie and put it at the beginning, at the end. Yeah. They were like shorts.
Which you couldn't do with The Rescuers. The Rescuers flowed pretty well.
It's different. I mean, The Rescuers was the first film that kind of had a little bit of a different dynamic because you did have these. It was a very interesting situation because of the way things happened at Disney. You had a group of artists, best in the world, that were like in their 60s. And then you had a group of artists, young, very green people, who were mostly in their 20s,
right.
Early 20s, working together. I mean, that's an odd situation. But I think that had a little something to do with The Rescuers. But I mean, it's arguable. But I think the influence of just having some new people mixed in with some of the older people created a little different sort of atmosphere. And that would only continue as things went on. But I don't know again how. Never really talked to Frank and Ollie about it. But I think particularly Frank and Ollie liked working with the young people, and they were the mentors really. When I did my test with the Cruella de Vil, I was originally interested in the character Madame Medusa, and was thinking that I might want to work on that character in some form or do assistant work or whatever. That was part of what was in my mind. But Milt wasn't a mentor the same way Frank and Ollie was. He had an assistant, Stan Green, who was kind of anyone who worked for Milt didn't actually work with Milt. They worked with Stan Green, and Stan kind of, and Milt was
kept everybody at bay.
Milt was intimidating. He was probably the scary. He was the Simon Cowell, I've always said, in terms of the animators at that time, and that he was probably the most judgmental, the most like.
Did you ever experience firsthand his judgmentalist?
Well, not as bad as some people. I heard stories about people that Milt could be blunt and he could be kind of, cruel. I only once, when I was working on the Cruella test, I took some stuff to show him, and I sort of gathered my courage because I knew, and there were temper tantrums with Milt, and he wasn't like, say, he didn't pull punches, he said what he thought, and for the most part he felt, and drawing was really important to him, and that was not my strong suit. And Milt kind of felt nobody could draw. I think he felt Annie Gaskell could draw. He was the only guy of any of the young people that Milt felt could draw.
Yeah.
But my meeting with him, he was actually pretty nice, and he wasn't nearly as bad. He made a few drawings for me and helped me out a little bit. He's also, Milt, interesting enough, was a big Sherlock Holmes fan.
Oh.
So we had that in common. But I got off okay with Milt.
And then Milt left towards the end of the picture, and then somebody else finished up Medusa. But moving on to Fox and the Hound, that's really where you started transitioning out of animation into story. And what happened to, because you had sort of been focused on animation for several years, what changed for you?
Well, really, I was always interested in story, and even on Rescuers, I would write up like these things. I would write up like 5 or 6 pages of notes. Like after a screening, I would send notes to Woolley or Frank. And I know the first time I sent notes, I I know Woolley kind of got upset because the style that I wrote in was just too. I think I wasn't so as nice about my notes as maybe I should have been. I mean, it wasn't that. I mean, I was just, trying to say what I thought. But I think he felt like, I mean, some of
You
the
were
stuff
attacking what was
maybe
there.
a little bit. So after that, then I toned down my writing style a little bit. But I did have ideas on story, and I did send notes, and I did read the notes. So sometimes they would like some of the notes. Then I worked on Pete's Dragon. For 6 months, I worked on Pete's Dragon.
And you animated on that?
Animated. I did quite a bit of animation on Pete's Dragon.
How
I had
was that
fun.
experience?
That experience was fun for me. I had a good time on Pete's Dragon. Don was the director, but I was he gave me what I wanted, which is kind of what I always wanted when I was animators. I always wanted sections of continuity.
Right.
I always enjoyed
And he
that
did
much
that.
more. And he gave me really some good sections of continuity. And he did something that other directors didn't do, which I think a lot of directors outside of Disney do, is he did a couple of drawings in each scene. And that
okay.
I like that, because drawing, I would like just struggle a lot just to get, especially my first drawings, just to have a starting point like that. So I had fun on Pete's Dragon, and I was fast on Pete's Dragon. I did about 8 feet a week on that, and the animation turned out pretty well. It's generally, that film was a good experience for me. It's not my favorite movie in terms of the finished film.
I don't think they've re-released that.
I don't know if they've re-released it. It's been on video a lot, whatever. But I had a good time. But also, and then after Pete's Dragon, they wanted me to be a supervising animator on Fox and the Hound.
Wow.
And I sort of was. But Fox and the Hound was not a real bright spot for me for a lot of different reasons, I think. The character that I was going to be the supervisor of was the character of Big Mama.
Oh, yeah.
Pearl Bailey was the voice for, and she did a great voice. But I went through, I think, what you would call a slump.
Really?
I mean, Rescuers, I had some periods. I struggled for a while in Rescuers, and then I got toward the last year of Rescuers, I started to kind of get it, and got somewhat made a pretty nice
You
advance
were on a
there.
roll.
And on Pete's Dragon, I was doing well, so I had a climb there. And then Fox and the Hound, I kind of hit a low.
Why?
I just wasn't feeling it. I'd say a few reasons. One, the character of Big Mama for me didn't appeal to me. So, like I say, I like continuity, I like sections, and she seemed to me like she was a character outside of the story. She was just always kind of watching what was going on and sort of commenting and making little. But she didn't, from an acting standpoint, it didn't interest me as much as some of the other stuff. And then later, I asked to be taken off Big Mama and went on like the older Fox and Hound and the Widows. But also, I was starting to feel at that point, and in retrospect, that animation can be the most fun thing in the world. I mean, it's like it's just something, drawing is something really fun about just drawing, and then your characters start to come to life and you flip it. But something started to not become fun for me. And I started to feel more and more that it wasn't really what I sort of wanted to keep doing.
You wanted to be in continuity.
I really wanted to be in story. I wanted to
yeah.
be in story. That I was just more interested in story and more interested in the bigger aspects of the movie, which as an animator, you're an actor and you do those little sections it sort of took a while. It was a difficult thing because I started when I was pretty young and it just sort of fell into it, and now I was going through a period of questioning things. So I sort of made a decision somewhere during Fox the Hound that I really felt like I wanted to try to get into story, and I told them that, but they were not, I would say, because I'd say my animation was pretty good, but it was inconsistent to me all while I was an animator. Sometimes scenes would turn out really well, sometimes not so well. A lot depended, I was an instinctive animator, so a lot depended just how I felt, and I couldn't be as consistent as I wanted to be. But I did become sort of fast compared with a lot of the younger animators, and that was looked on importantly.
Favorably.
So I was sort of, at least at first, discouraged from going into story. They wanted me to keep animating, and that just started this.
And then you started pushing against that.
Thing. And also I was interested in the Black Cauldron. It's ironic in terms of things that happened, but I think at that time, a lot of us, and me, was looking toward the Black Cauldron as this was going to be our Snow White. This was going to be the big film, the big picture that was going to be this new young people now at Disney. We were going to make our statement with that film. And I had read the books of Lloyd Alexander, the Parodian Chronicles. And I really liked the books and thought there were a lot of really strong characters and strong themes. I mean, the story had to be kind of invented because it was 5 books. And
telescope it down.
But I really liked, and so I sort of wanted to be in story on the Black Cauldron. I mean, that was, and I well, yeah, you know.
That ended up being.
So I pushed, and I finished Fox and the Hound. I mean, they wouldn't let me go into story until after Fox and the Hound. But then.
But there's one thing. Do you remember? I think you were one of the leaders on this. There was a bunch of us, and I think you were sort of at the head of the pack. We were trying to convince them to kill Chief. Because
I remember that was
it would motivate. To this day, I think that would have made the picture stronger.
I remember that at the time. That was I mean, certainly with what ended up with Chief dramatically is questionable. He hurt his leg.
So,
but in terms of
the
consequences that creates in terms of the friendship, it's questionable. But I did go through Fox and the Hound, and I completed that assignment, and then I said, once you complete Fox and the Hound, you can go on to the Black Cauldron and do story. I mean, I had no experience doing story. Writing, I had a little bit of experience doing, but not actually doing storyboards. So, to make a long story short, I went on to Black Cauldron. It was not the experience I hoped for.
Yes, it wasn't the experience anybody hoped for. And it's too bad because Vance Gary had great beat boards with the Horn King and the big red beard. And
there was a lot of, and then there was great potential. And some people liked the movie. For myself, and particularly for John, story just didn't work out. We kind of got in trouble on that movie.
We all got kicked off of it.
Eventually we got kicked off. Before we got kicked off, we got put on probation, which was a bad experience. And there was a point, because we had strong ideas, and we felt like, and we were young, I mean, and we had strong ideas, and our ideas weren't shared by the people in charge. And at a certain point, we were in a room doing story that we knew we were just sort of like just doing stuff that was not going to be used in the movie.
Sequence by sequence, it was taken away. The boards were removed to another part of the studio.
Our credit on Black Cauldron is additional story by, and that's very accurate, which means story we didn't use.
That's right.
But the probably good thing that came out of that experience was that John and I, who we knew each other all through Fox and the Hound, and we were kind of friends, I think, because I think John and I kind of got along because we have a lot in common. We're almost the same age. We're both from the Midwest. We were both raised Catholic. We were both cartoonists for the school newspaper, and our sensibilities are fairly similar, even though our personalities are different. But our sensibilities are similar, and I'd say we kind of bonded on the Black Cauldron in the sense that we had a shared vision. We had a shared vision of the movie that was not shared by all.
We had a shared version of the vision was that we were all being beaten down.
So we kind of, I'd say we kind of bonded some, and then you went through all that. We all kind of went through that. Tom Wilhite then was. I think John. I was interested in the story. That was sort of my goal, to get into the story, and it hadn't worked out. John was really looked on, I'd say, from fairly early on among the CalArts people as a potential director. like John's so smart, and he was always sort of one of the best people just to give critiques and notes on people's scenes.
And he was the first guy to make the jump to director.
He was, and Tom Wilhite, and then John talked about this more, and I may misremember things, but I think Tom Wilhite was pushing. Well, first of all, I mean, John, was a director on The Black Cauldron. I was doing story. John was actually a director on the film. So in some ways, his experience could be
was even
worse
uglier
than me,
than
because he was a director among 3 other sequence directors who just kind of did not allow him to be part of their process.
Yeah, no, so, I remember.
I'm sure he went into that, and I was doing story. He was doing story as well, but he was also a director. I did during that time. During Rescuers, I was a Sherlock Holmes fan. During Rescuers, I found these books by Eve Titus that, and I thought, Sherlock Holmes. I'd always thought, even when I was doing my film, Sherlock Holmes in Disney animation, something about that appealed to me. And then I was at a meeting with Joe Hale. I remember Pete Young was there. I don't remember too much exactly, but Joe was looking for ideas, and I just mentioned Basil of Baker Street, those books. And I think Joe had. That was all I did, was just mention those books. But Joe had someone do a kind of a drawing. Mel Shaw did stuff later, but I think this was Mel Shaw.
Pete had somebody did a drawing, and Pete had Jim Coleman paint it. And that drawing was taken up to Ron Miller.
Right, and Ron Miller liked it, and so they were doing Basil of Baker Street, and then Basil of Baker Street sort of got going, and for people who just seemed like it wasn't working out on Cauldron, I think Basil was sort of thought of as maybe a little oasis or something that the refugees from Cauldron could maybe attach themselves to. And so John went on that as a director, and I went on it doing story, and Vance went on it. Vance Gary and Pete Young was on it, and there's Pete at the time, and so while Cauldron was going on, Cauldron was a long production. It took about 4 years in production, I think, which is a long time.
Well, it was an expensive picture for the time.
Very
it was $35 million.
Very expensive picture. So we were doing. A very small group of us were working on Basil of Baker Street while Cauldron, all during that time. And just kind of developing characters and story. And then it was during that period then where suddenly everything changed, which was, I think, about a year before Cauldron was due to be released, yet that we just started hearing these rumors that there was a corporate raider Saul Steinberg, who was trying to buy the Disney company
and break it up.
I think the plan would be that he would, if he was successful, that he would sell the film library and sell the parks and essentially destroy the company, but make
a lot of money
in the process, which he had done with other companies, and that was going on a lot in the 80s.
Bain Capital.
And I don't think any of us thought that we would be happy if that happened at Disney.
No.
But who knew what was going to happen? It was kind of this crisis period. Nobody knew what was going to happen at Disney. And Ron Miller, at a certain point, just kind of disappeared. He was the head of the company, and then he was gone. And he produced the films that were made. So he was our producer as well as the Black Cauldron.
Coming down to story meetings and the whole shot.
Yeah, we didn't see him. He wasn't this hands-on a producer as some might be, but we saw him. He came in, every once in a while, looked at what was going on, and then he was gone, and we didn't see him. And then Roy Disney, who had kind of left the company and was unhappy with certain things, kind of came back with these guys, the Bass Brothers, the White Knights, and then they brought Michael Eisner, who brought Jeffrey Katzenberg into Disney. Ron Miller was gone. Now it was Michael and Jeffrey. And everything changed, and for us, it was this weird thing because we were such a small little group that we weren't sure anybody even knew we existed. There was even this thought, should we tell anybody? Maybe we can just... And Bernie
Manson.
Bernie Manson.
He was
Well,
head
he was
of the picture.
He became the head of the picture. He was like the head director. He was a director. John Musker was a director. Dave Michener was a director on it. I was doing story, and Ron Miller was the producer. And then at a certain point, we pitched Basil to Michael and Jeffrey. They came down. We pitched it. I think Bernie showed it to Roy. And then Roy said, "Well, you've got to sort of pitch this to."
I remember the day it was pitched. It was pitched in the hall to Jeffrey.
Right, and Michael was there too. And we had been working on it probably about over 2 years at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
Had a lot of sequences boarded, and casting had been done, various things. But we had to sort of pitch it like it's a brand new idea almost. I mean, Vance, we had like sort of continuity boards that kind of told the story and just went through the basic story of it. And Michael and Jeffrey liked it. At least they liked it to say, let's do it. Let's do it. I know Michael said at the time, it's like, how much longer do you think you will need to finish this? And I think we thought it would take about 2 years to finish it. And he said, well, I want it in one. And then he asked how much money we thought it would cost. And we thought it would cost, I think, about $20 million at that time. I want it for 10.
Yeah.
And it was done in a year.
It was. And you became a director.
I became a director.
And Bernie moved up to produce.
That's why I became a director. And it relates to, because Ron Miller was the producer, and Ron Miller left, we didn't have a producer. So Bernie became the producer. And I thought, Bernie should become the producer. But Bernie felt that if he was producing, that he wouldn't have enough time to direct. So that opened the space for another director. So I thought, well,
you stepped right in.
So I went to Bernie and sort of pitched Bernie, and I'd done a lot of boards on the thing, and Bernie said, "Sounds like a good idea." So and that's,
you stepped into the director's shoes.
Thanks to Bernie. Bernie sort of supported me doing that. I'm very sort of grateful to Bernie for
and the
going
picture
along with that.
turned out well. I have another question for you, and that is, the meeting in the commissary where you pitched The Little Mermaid. I think you also pitched Treasure Planet at that
At the same meeting, yes, I did.
And you pitched both those, because I remember that. And you got, the thing that was interesting to me is that at the time they went, we just did Splash, we're not going to. And they basically said no. So how did you sell it, even though at the pitch meeting they said, we don't think so?
Okay, here's how it happened. I mean, that whole thing was what was called a gong show.
Yeah.
It was Michael Eisner's term, I think, and he had come from Paramount Studios, and the gong show was something they did at Paramount, where they got a group of people together, and then you'd all come back and pitch ideas, and it would be gong, yes, or gong, no, I mean, or else they'd say
yes or gone.
Yes or gone.
You're gone.
So we had 2 weeks to come up with ideas. Everyone was told to come up with 5 ideas. And I did. I looked for 5 ideas. I scrambled. The first idea was The Little Mermaid, which I was just looking for ideas, and I went into a bookstore and saw a book of fairy tales, and I started looking through it, and I stumbled on The Little Mermaid, which I had not read, that I at least remember, and I read it, and I thought, this is cool. I mean, there's something that seems like this could make a good feature. I wonder why they've never done this. And then it ends really sad. I mean, it sort of has this tragic, sad ending.
As Anderson's also usually did.
Most of the time, he was not a real happy guy. And but I actually wrote up. I got some ideas. I mean, it was some ideas, and I wrote up a 2-page treatment on The Little Mermaid. I actually wrote up 2-page treatments on all 5 of my ideas. One of which was called Treasure Island in Space. That was one of the ideas from that meeting.
What were the other 3? Or do you remember?
The other 3 were, a couple of them were also science fiction things, because I was a science fiction fan, and one of them was actually The Trumpet of the Swan. But so when we got to the meeting 2 weeks later, when we went around the table, Michael just said, pitch your best idea. And we went around the table. I remember Pete Young was at that, and I think Pete pitched Oliver and Company. That came out of that. I think Michael himself pitched doing a sequel to The Rescuers. That came at that meeting too, out of that. when they got to me, this picture best idea, I said The Little Mermaid, and just as you said, they kind of said Gong. I think no, it just, but and I was really disappointed, and my wife Tammy, who was not my wife then, but we were going together. I remember that night just feeling just really kind of depressed because I was, I really think that there could be something in that, and I was disappointed they gone it. But I had written the 2-page treatment. Seems to me, and I could have my dates wrong, like 2 days after that, Jeffrey Kassenberg calls me up, and he had read all 5 of my treatments, all 5 of them, and he went down the line of each one. This one, no, I don't think so for this sort of. This one, well, it seems more like a TV idea, and maybe, but he sent it to across the street. And this one, but The Little Mermaid, Michael and I both agree that we think there's something in that, and we want to.
So they reversed
it. They reversed it. And that's how that happened. As far as why they reversed it, exactly, but they did, and I was very, very happy. And then I was sort of then developing it by myself for a little while, and it was sort of Roy Disney. I worked with Bruce Morris for a little bit, doing some visual development, and they were looking for a writer for it, and that was one of the big things of Michael and Jeffrey, which as we were there, that scripts were a different thing in the earlier period. They weren't screenplays. I mean, there wasn't like you were making a movie. Like there was never for The Great Mouse Detective or The Black Cauldron, there was not really like a complete
never a screenplay.
Script.
It was basically board continuity.
Yeah, and writing was done, but done kind of within that. And but Michael and Jeffrey, they read scripts, and it's like nothing's going to go forward unless there's a script that we like. So they were looking for a writer, and for a while they were talking about Michael Christopher, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning author, writer, and who was going to do it. We met with Michael Christopher, and he backed out at a certain point. He said, "I think my take is going to be too dark," and it probably would have been too dark.
Yeah.
And at that point, when he backed out, then I went to John, because John liked to write, and I liked to write, and I said, "What if we went to Peter and pitched ourselves to write the screenplay?"
Yeah.
And I had a script. Of like sort of some Twilight Zone things that I had written, one of which they had done for like Disney TV. So I had that sort of one sample script.
I remember when you wrote that.
And so went to Peter, pitched that, read the script, and then he said, "Yeah, okay." There really, in retrospect, wasn't that much to lose, I guess, but I think we were still kind of surprised that he said yes, but we were excited about that.
So you wrote the script.
So we actually met with Howard Ashman before we wrote the script. While we were finishing Great Mouse Detective, around the same time, we didn't know it, that Howard, they had been courting Howard, like Michael Jeffrey in particular, I think. David Geffen was a big fan of Howard Ashman, and had said to Jeffrey, I think, "Howard Ashman, he's a really, really talented guy. You need to hire this guy." So Jeffrey was trying to get Howard to come to Disney, and he showed Howard a bunch of things in development, both live action and animation, and The Little Mermaid was one of those.
And he sparked
And
to
Howard
that?
said, whatever else I do, I'd love to write the songs for The Little Mermaid. He was really interested in that. As it turned out, he had done a musical earlier called Andersong, something he had done in the past. So he was, before Great Mouse Detective came out, it was a summer film, I think it came out in July. The May before that, we flew to New York, John and I, and we met with Howard sort of for the first time. We had a 12-page treatment at that point. The 2-page treatment was now expanded into a 12-page treatment.
Yeah.
And we met with Howard before we had gone on the trip. We had heard from Peter. It's like, yeah, Howard's got a lot of ideas. It sounds really good, and he wants to make the crab a Rastafarian. And we're sort of like, what does that mean? We actually had a crab in our treatment, a crab character who was a court conductor, who would become sort of Ariel's sort of confidant in the film, who was sort of a stuffy British character called Clarence, I think.
Oh, okay.
And so when we met with Howard, it was great meeting with Howard. He was about to direct Smile, the musical Smile, for Broadway, and we met with him. We talked over the story, the songs. how songs could fit into the story, and we took a lot of notes. We came out of that, that was one of the ideas that the crab. Howard's idea was basically, when it was explained, he was looking for a way to work more sort of pop music into the score, and he felt like a Caribbean, if it was a Caribbean crab, that could bring in calypso as a natural kind of thing and not be forced. That was what he was thinking. But it also was a very interesting sort of character, kind of not as, I think ours would have been maybe more stock, and that was, and there were a lot of things like that. So, but Howard was doing Smile, so we came out of that meeting, and then we wrote the script.
And so you made him into a Calypsonian character.
And we named him Sebastian. Clarence wouldn't work for a Caribbean crab.